My credentials are on the first slide, and that is to say that about 5 years ago now, my husband and I started a company called Vermont Evaporator Company. We are headquartered in Montpelier, Vermont, and we manufacture and sell tools and equipment to hobby maple syrup makers. So at this point, after 5 years and after, 4.5 COVID-free years of traveling around sugar country and talking to all sorts of different people who make maple syrup, I can confidently say that I have had thousands of conversations with thousands of people who are thinking about starting or having just started or have been doing subsistence sort of style or hobby style or small farm style maple syrup making for some time, sometimes for a lifetime. So that's credential number 1. Credential number 2, this is our latest staff picture. Credential number 2 is that we also make our own maple syrup as a hobby, and we make a subsistence level 5 to 10 gallons a year as a family. And so does my brother and his wife, who are also in this picture. And we have been doing that for 6 years. And so those two stories, those two credentials are related in that, when we moved to the land that you see in this picture here, we quickly discovered that we had some really beautiful maple trees, some sugar maple trees up on the top of a hill, and some sugar maples and red maples lining the driveway that were really easily accessible. And so we decided that we were going to start making maple syrup. And the way that we started was to use the Thanksgiving turkey pan and put it on our grill and spend twice as much in propane, shamefully, as we would have spent just buying the maple syrup from our local producer. So we were dissatisfied with that outcome. It also took all weekend, so that was also a bummer, to make about half a gallon. So what we did is we started looking around for a way to make maple syrup in a way that didn't necessitate building a sugar house, because that was wasn't in our time or financial budget at the time. And we also wanted to be able to use wood as fuel. Well, it turned out that there wasn't anything. And so my husband took an old idea, turning a 55-gallon drum into a small evaporator for an open air experience, not a new idea, but he re-engineered it and did some engineering that allowed it to be made, if not on a mass scale, on a multiple scale. And so that's how the company actually began. So our hobby is 1 year older than our company. And so we've also made all of the mistakes and have had all of the questions that many of our customers come to us with. So to give you an idea, I've already given you one idea of the size of our hobby. I've said 5 to 10 gallons. And for us, because we sugar with sugar maples and red maples, and I'll get into that in a little bit, that 5 to 10 gallons comes from 25 to 50 taps. That's the way a sugar maker talks about the size of their operation. They talk in taps. They don't talk in trees, because when a tree gets to be a certain size, you can put 2 taps into it and it doubles the output of the tree for that year. You never put more than 2 taps in a tree. And until a tree is big enough to handle it, you only put in 1 tap. So 25 to 50 taps for us might be 20 to 40 trees. Not too many of them are big. But anyway, that's just a little bit of the lingo. So before I say anything else, I just want to let you know, Brenda, that you don't have to remember anything that I say. This is a picture of the homepage of our website, vermontevaporator.com. And the next slide shows you, if you go under Learn, everything that I'm going to say is either in Sugaring for Beginners or our blog. And so you can feel free to just sit back and relax and not take notes. Great. So I have styled this presentation in a calendar format. I do often give this talk at this time of the year because on normal years we are traveling around sugar country all the way west to Wisconsin and all the way south to North Carolina, believe it or not, to sell our wares and to educate people about backyard sugar making. And so our calendar, because of that fact, that's when we're hanging out with people, starts in late summer and fall. And in late summer and fall is the best time to take advantage of the warm weather and the fact that the leaves are out and perhaps even changing color to identify your trees. There are three basic ways that people identify trees. They use the leaf, they use the fruit or the seed, and they use the bark. The leaf, which is there for longer than the seed, but not as long as the bark, but that is more distinctive, is really the easiest way to identify your trees. We'll also talk about, as we talk about identifying your trees, you should know that any maple will do, and any maple means any maple. So traditionally, the sugar maple, which is the maple that produces a leaf that looks like the Canadian flag, the sugar maple is so named because it has the highest sugar content of any tree, actually, period, but of any maple tree, certainly. Now, you'll notice a couple of things. Most people know a maple leaf when they see one because it's a familiar image. But most people don't know what the difference is between the maples. And it's important because, you know, it takes 40 gallons on average of a sugar maple sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. But it might take 60 gallons of red maple sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And it might take even more to make maple syrup out of the sap of a silver maple tree, or a box elder, which is in the maple family, or a big leaf maple, or even a Norway maple. I may have left one out, but we'll see in a couple of slides. So if you do have these leaves on your trees, then you're going to want to tag them as your, you know, sure to tap. Be sure to tap these trees. Also think about access. So even as you're walking around with no snow freely on the ground, think about, am I going to be able to access this tree in the winter? Or is it so steep and so far away that it's not one that I'm going to want to tap for my first adventure in maple sugaring? Having said that, let's look at the leaf of the sugar maple really closely. I'm going to show you a couple of different things to look at. The edge of the maple leaf is smooth and swoopy. So if you pretend it's metal and you were to drag your finger sort of just along one of the straight lines, you know, of that maple leaf, you're not going to cut your finger, right? It's not serrated, it's not jagged, it's smooth. So that's one of the things that you look at when you're trying to figure out one maple from another maple. Then look at the lobes of the leaf. There are, you know, officially 3 or 5 lobes in any maple leaf. Well, some maple leaves are more clearly 5 and some are more clearly 3. On the sugar maple, it's really more clearly 5. You can see the dominant lobe there in the middle and then the 2 larger lobes on the side. But then there's also pretty good distinction on the 4th and the 5th lobes near the stem of the leaf. So that's the second thing to look at. The third thing to look at in the fall for sugar maples is that the sugar maple can turn into any color or all colors. So those maple trees that you see in the fall that are rainbow, just absolutely vibrant pinks and reds, and you know, they still have some greens and they've got yellows. Those are sugar maple leaves. Other maples don't have as interesting foliage, or they, for example, tend to go yellow or tend to go red. So the sugar maple leaf, there's the Canadian flag. It has a swoopy, smooth edge. It has 5 dominant lobes, and it can be a rainbow in the fall. Next, we've got the red maple. I've given you two leaves here, two pictures of leaves here because it shows one of the characteristics of the red maple, and that is in the fall. And this is, I think, partially why a red maple is called a red maple. In the fall, the leaves almost universally turn red. In the spring, the buds are always, when the leaves aren't quite out yet, but they're coming, those buds are always red. So those are two sort of clues that what you're looking at is a red maple. So in contrast to the sugar maple leaf, let's look at the edge of the red maple leaf. Instead of being smooth and swoopy, it's serrated and jagged. So you can imagine if you rubbed your finger the wrong way on the side of a maple leaf that was made out of metal, that it would be like a bread knife. That's clue number one, that what you're looking at is a red maple leaf. Clue number two is that you can kind of see that maybe it's thinking about having 5 lobes, but really there's only 3 dominant lobes in a red maple. So you've got a very dominant middle lobe and then 2 lobes on the side. But on the bottom, it's just really not quite as distinct that there are 5 sections as opposed to 3 sections on this leaf. So that's number 2. And number 3, of course, is the color if you're walking around in fall. So the edge is serrated. There are really 3 dominant lobes. And in the fall, the red maple turns red. Those are the top 2. So normally when I'm talking to a hobby sugar maker, they're talking to me about their sugar maples and they're talking to me about their red maples. Any maple will do, and I'd say the third runner-up for most popular maple to tap is probably the silver maple. Now the silver maple I think is so named because if you kind of stand back and look at one in the breeze, the underside of the leaf is a little gray or maybe silver if the sun hits it right. So that's one, while I haven't noticed or heard that the silver maple turns any particular hue in the fall, there is a color cue as long as you get there in the summer, I suppose, or on a sunny day, if you see that the silver maple leaf looks gray or silver on the underside, certainly lighter green than the others. So you'll notice that like the sugar maple, the sides, side of the leaf, the edge of the leaf is smooth. It is not serrated, right? But unlike the sugar maple, like the sugar maple, I should say, there are 5 dominant lobes on this leaf. It's just that they're all thinner. So whereas the sugar maple has fat lobes, and in fact, the red maple sort of has fat lobes as well. The silver maple has these skinny, it's almost like a hand, has these skinny lobes. So there's a color cue, underside is very light, maybe even gray or silver. The edge is smooth and swoopy. It has 5 lobes, but they're skinny lobes. They're lobes that sort of remind you of a hand. So let's see if I missed any. No, I didn't. So there are, and this surprises people, there are 37 states at least, and we learn about new ones all the time when we sort of publish something that says there are 37 states where people make maple syrup in their backyards. And then we say, you know, we heard number 37 was Georgia because we got a message from a customer that says, don't forget Georgia, you know, because we take X, Y, and Z trees and make maple syrup out of them, whatever it is that they have access to. Maple sugaring is associated with our part of the country, Vermont and New York and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, Maine, and then certain places of the Midwest as well, just because history and tradition and also ecology. So the sugar maple is a pickier tree than the red maple, than the silver maple. I don't know very much about the big leaf maple. I think that's a Western tree. And I don't know very much about the box elder either, although I think those predominate throughout the country. The Norway maple is a part of the family, but it is an invasive species, so it's not very popular to talk about. Although if you have a Norway maple and you live in a city or a suburb, there's nothing wrong with tapping it and drinking the sap hot or cold or boiling it down until it becomes syrup. When I say any maple will do, it's true. We've talked about the reasons why sugar maple predominates in the industry, and that is it takes the least amount of work to make syrup out of the sugar maple. The industry is now enough of a bulk industry, or there's a big enough market for bulk syrup, that many of the professional sugar makers in our area here in the Northeast, at least, will also tap their red trees while they're out in the woods, because it doesn't take them much more work to do so. And instead of it being very important to get certain grades of syrup, they're making syrup to put in giant, 40-gallon stainless steel tubs and sell on the market that way. The color of syrup is related, and so the grade of syrup is related to how long you had to cook it or how much you had to caramelize it in order to get it to be the consistency of syrup. And the consistency of syrup just has to do with how much sugar is in that solution, right? So a sugar maple can give you very light syrup because you didn't have to cook it for that long. But the red maple will give you the sap that you have to cook for another 50%, right? And so you'll tend to get a darker syrup. Now the sap in one tree is not uniform throughout the season. The sap has the most sugar in it at the beginning of the season. And so you'll only get that very light syrup from the sap of a sugar maple tree that was given at the beginning of a season. So the syrup that you get from a red maple tastes like a middle of the season sugar maple. And Brenda, since you're the only one here, I am going to answer your question.
Do they all taste the same once they're boiled down?
They do, and with one caveat, and that is just about the grades. So there is a difference in taste from a very light syrup to a very dark syrup. That is, if you're looking at syrup of the same color from two different species of trees, it's going to taste exactly the same. It's very odd, and those of us who make maple syrup in the backyard, we just mix all the sap, and like I said, professionally even sometimes sugar makers will mix all the sap. I don't get the sense that any other kind of maple is used. Silver maples tend to be a decorative tree, at least in this part of the country, and so I don't know that is something that's in the mix professionally right now, but I've met plenty of people who hobby with silver or big leaf or Norway or box elder, just because that's the kind of tree that they have access to. All right, so that is pretty much it for this time of the year. Although I will note, if you skip all the way down to late spring and summer, we have source and stack your sugar wood. That's a lot easier to do at this time of the year than it is when there's snow on the ground. So we'll talk about that when we get back to summer at the end of the presentation, but that's something to just lodge in the back of your mind, that really probably should also be in late summer and fall on the tasks. So we are now going to talk about early winter. And early winter conveniently is also gift giving season. And so we get many questions at that time of the year for people who know and love a hobby sugar maker. And what you're looking to do is collect the things that you're going to need when it's easy to collect them, when there's not so much snow on the ground and when you have a little space to think about it. So first, drill and drill bits. This is a drawing of the old way to do it, and that is with a drill that's called a brace, and a drill bit that probably was just sort of pulled out of the box. You can see that he's got the old galvanized buckets here, and he's got a hammer, and he's presumably has spiles as well, spiles or spouts, and that's pretty much all you need. These days we use a battery powered drill, and we use it is not strictly speaking necessary to do so, but we use a special drill bit that is made for tapping trees. It's made of an appropriate material that's sort of, you know, going to be effective in that situation. And it's also made in the 2 relevant sizes that taps come in. And those sizes are 7/16 of an inch and 5/16 of an inch. 7/16 of an inch is a traditional size. It's the size of the spiles or spouts that you're going to find on the used market if they're sort of antique-y, right? So the these old cast iron spiles, those are 7/16. And so when you're thinking about your drill bit size, sort of fast forward to, okay, what kind of spiles am I going to be used? Do I have some, you know, left over from the prior owner of this barn, or am I going to go try and find some on the used market, or am I going to purchase new? The 5/16 tap size, it makes a smaller wound in the tree, and so it is favored by industry, and it's favored by many of us hobbyists as well. Until this point, this is a picture of an old galvanized bucket and one of the cast iron spiles. And until right now, that's what we've been using to sugar in our woods. There are a giant variety of things on the market. There are plastic spouts, there are aluminum spouts, both cast and rolled. There are stainless spouts, and there are plastic buckets. There are plastic buckets that look like metal buckets. There are aluminum buckets. There are no longer any galvanized steel buckets on the market because they may in fact have lead in them. And so they're certainly no longer used for commercial purposes, and they're becoming less and less popular even for backyard purposes. It also so happens that you can make a lot of money selling them as antiques. And so that's probably the direction that we're going to go with our old galvanized buckets as we think about, we're hoping to go into selling buckets and spiles this fall, sort of adding that to our line of products. People also use plastic bags, food safe plastic bags. They have them on the market with special holders. People use milk jugs that they've washed out. People use other sort of food safe, 1 or 2 gallon buckets. So people get creative, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I have one of the things that I've blogged about is how to find all those things on the market, depending on what you're interested in. Not all of us have, a sugar supply store nearby. So that's another thing you don't have to figure out on your own because I've already figured it out for you. So here you can see, this is pictures meant to remind you, word to the wise, the lid is normally sold separately. And so when you're budgeting, just remember that when somebody's selling you a bucket, it doesn't necessarily, and in fact, usually does not come with the lid. This is my daughter. She's schlepping the sap from the trees to our evaporator. And as you can see, she's doing so with a garden cart and a couple of 5-gallon food safe jugs that are a little too heavy for her to carry through the woods. Food safe is really the key. 2 gallons if you can't carry 5 gallons if you can. And then you're also going to need to think about storage. So on our website, I was reminding myself of sort of what the information that we had there, and we say, treat your sap like milk. It is an organic material, it will spoil. But like milk, it won't spoil right away. You need to refrigerate it, but it'll last a week or a week and a half. We've never pushed it further than that, right? I'm sure milk fresh out of the cow will last a lot longer than that, but grocery store milk, a week and a half, right? So this picture is, a blue 55-gallon food safe plastic jug. and it's where we store our sap. Right now, you can see it's in our garage because our garage stays cold like a refrigerator throughout March and April. It's on the north side of our house, and we've still got quite a lot of snowpack at that time of the year. This presents more of a challenge for folks in the southern tier of backyard sugaring, but I have heard of folks, you know, storing their jugs in a stream, or you know, in sort of the mid-tier, sort of making snowbanks on the north side, or using the snowbanks that are already there on the north side of a building as their sap refrigeration method. So whatever method you're going to use, you are going to need something to store that sap in. Okay, so you'll have to excuse, let me preface these next few slides. These next few slides were taken from a fundraising pitch I did for our company. So they're a little aggressive, but hopefully get a point across, and that is that really all you need in order to evaporate sap into syrup is a heat source and as much surface area as you can muster up with whatever sort of pan you're going to be using. So plenty of people use cinder block and brick and hotel pans and make a wood fire, or use one or two of those pretty powerful turkey fryers if they're going to use propane, and make maple syrup that way. It is not neat. It is not pretty. You know, it's takes a long time, but the syrup still tastes good. And, you know, I have some people who use wood in this kind of situation that will say, yeah, my syrup tastes a little smoky at the end, you know, at the end of the day, but that's okay. I don't mind. So this is a very popular, and they get a lot better looking and more sophisticated looking than this, but this was for a pitch competition. So I picked the ones for comic relief. This is not a good idea. What you're looking to do is to make a very direct, you want to direct the heat through the bottom of whatever vessel that you're using. So this is not very effective. As you can see, there's still ice in one of those buckets. So my heart goes out to these folks for how long it is that they had to boil to get maple syrup. And then very commonly I'll hear from people, well, I know a welder, you know, and I converted a filing cabinet, or, you know, an oil barrel, or, you know, you fill in the blank, and made it into the firebox and then put a pan on the top of it. So heat source, as much surface area as you can muster together. You should also think about whether you're going to be starting indoors or outdoors. So for those of you that have some kind of an outbuilding that you're thinking about maybe putting into use as a maple house, you know, that really, if you've got the money, that really opens up the possibilities for you. You know, you can purchase something like the sapling, or you can build something out of cinder blocks, and maybe even get yourself a sort of a quote unquote real stainless steel sugaring pan. But you can also buy an evaporator from a bigger company like a Leader or CDL or Dominion and Grimm. If you are going to be outside, you know, the reason why this says the competition and the sapling is because we really are the only people that make something that's sort of engineered to do this thing and do it outside. Our unit is portable when it's not hot, and it also converts into doing other things in the off season. So you need an evaporator or an idea about how you're going to evaporate, and it does not have to be complicated. And then finally, it's not strictly speaking necessary, but it's really nice, especially if you're making maple syrup to put into a jar and give to somebody as a gift, which so many of us do, to have appropriate filters that filter out the gunk that would otherwise sort of settle to the bottom of the jar. Those filters, there's what's called a filter and a pre-filter. And in this picture, you can see the hand is holding what's called a pre-filter. And it's made of a cloth, but it'll remind you of a coffee filter. And then the filter proper, which I've usually on the market, I see them with these loops. So the picture to the right will show you what they normally look like. But in both pictures, you can see that they are synthetic, but they look and feel and act like felt. And so the pre-filter sort of takes out the big junk so that you don't clog up your filter proper. All these things are reusable, after rinsing. You're going to want to have a couple of pre-filters in your filter. So, you'll layer a couple in there as you're finishing and filtering so that when one gets gunked up, one pre-filter gets gunked up, you take it out and you have this other pre-filter already in your filter. We'll get to it more, but that's definitely something that you're going to want to make sure you've got before you start. And then the final thing that you're going to need are something to put your finished product in. And there's any number of things on the market. There's so many things on the market. There's old metal, and there's, glass shaped like maple leaves, and glass shaped like bears, and glass shaped like, log cabins. And there's also just ball jars, which is what I have available to me, and what makes sense for me financially. That's what we use. All sizes, so that there's some are gifting and some are sort of pantry sizes. But that's that. So that's the prep. When it's late winter and early spring, you're going to be tapping your trees. You're going to be collecting the sap, and you're going to be finally making maple syrup. You've probably heard that sap flows during daytime thaws when the nights are freezing. And that's certainly true, but it's good to bear in mind that you are looking at the temperature to see what the world is doing at any given time, right? To figure out when it's time to tap your tree and when it's time to make maple syrup. But it's the tree that needs to freeze and thaw. And so you will notice after you start doing this that a sunny 29-degree day is going to be a day, in March. That's a day that's prime for the sap to flow. But a 40-degree gray day in April might not be a day when the sap is going to flow. And I'm using the March and April because that's my time period. Depending on where you are in the country, you may have a completely different time period. For example, I have customers in North Carolina who tap over Christmas because that's when they have the right weather. That's when their trees are experiencing the right freeze-thaw cycle. And I've got customers that are in the mountains of upstate New York who don't tap until mid-April generally, because that's, they're up in elevation, they're on the north side of a hill, and that's when it happens for them. So it depends on who you are. When in doubt, check with a local sugar maker, and just know that elevation and aspect, so how far you are up in elevation, and aspect refers to, are you on the south or north side of a hill? Those things matter too. So this is, we're in the section where people have a lot of different opinions about when to tap. Professional sugar makers tap as early as January 2nd, right? Because they have 20,000 taps to put in, and there's only so many people to hire, and they have to take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. Well, these days, professional sugar makers tap, and then they use lines to sort of seal that tap. And that has the effect of keeping that wound open in the tree. If I were to tap at the beginning of January, I would be running the risk that the wound in the tree would heal up, or heal up a little bit, or heal up mostly by the time it was the right climate for the tree to start running. And so those of us who do this on a hobby basis, or on a subsistence basis, or on a small basis, will really wait until the weather, the 10-day forecast is ending with something that looks to us like either a 29-degree sunny day or a 45-degree cloudy day, There, I'm going to show you a little video that we made. I like to see something happen before I try to do it myself. And so I'm going to show you a video where my husband is tapping a tree. He's going to say he's only going in an inch. An inch is fine. It's like the rule is an inch or an inch and a half, and you do let your spile be your guide because they are different sizes in length as well as width. And I think what he leaves out is what we talked about earlier, and that is you don't tap a tree until it's 10 inches in diameter. Then you tap it once. After a tree is 18 inches in diameter, you can tap it twice. You're not to tap a tree. It's not good for the tree, according to current science, to tap it more than twice, no matter how big the tree is. All right, so here is tapping a tree. Here we go.
Outside of a tree, maple tree we've identified earlier. You can tell usually by the bark, the grain, kind of what your species were. If you want to make your own 3-foot
Okay, so that video showed you one method of weighting, which was splitting your wood. Another method, here's another method of weighting. And you'll see in the background, I wanted to give you this picture too, because there's another sap storage solution that it shows. In the background, you can just see one of those big food safe plastic crates that's reinforced by aluminum on the outside. That ended up being way too big for our purposes. And so we changed over to the blue barrels. But if you are, for example, thinking about doing 100 taps or so, that would be a good thing to get your hands on. You see we've sort of positioned it on the up a hill thinking that we would, you know, have easy access to the sap in relation to where we are going to be making it into syrup there. So here we are waiting. So we, you know, we wait for the sap to flow, and then you collect it on a daily basis and put it in your refrigerator, however you've decided you're going to refrigerate. And then, you know, most of us that are subsistence or hobby folks, you know, we'll save it up and we'll sugar on the weekends, or maybe somebody works from home or can take an odd Wednesday off and sugar all day on that day. There are some folks that will, you know, put in a shift, come home at 3 and sugar until, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning. We're not those people. But if you're those people, that's fine. It does take a long time. It always takes longer than you think it's going to. But for us, it's a great Saturday or even Saturday into Sunday activity. So when you have a critical mass of sap, and what critical mass means is going to differ based on how big your vessel is. But for us, it means about 50 gallons. Then it's time to, you know, put aside a day to sugar. And what you're going to be doing is, you know, first cleaning your pan and sort of getting your rig set up. And then what you can see at the beginning of this video and what you'll see during this video is you're going to be pouring your sap, which may have bugs and sticks in it and such, through some cheesecloth on the way into the pan. You're always going to put your sap in your pan before you apply heat to that pan. Stainless, which is what most of us use, is a wonderful conductor of heat, but it needs to have something on the other side. And so this video will show you sort of that order of operations, and it'll show you on a prototype, which is of what we now make, which we're calling the sapling, but it's a little rough around the edges. So let me show you this. Here we go. So a couple of things you might not have, my husband kind of swallowed his words there when he was saying that the way that we clean our pans before we sugar is just using baking soda and water. We don't use anything acidic like vinegar, and we don't use anything with the detergent in it. And, you know, we just heat the pan, get it boiling for about a half an hour while there's, you know, it's really like a couple of tablespoons of baking soda in several gallons of water. That's another thing. The specifics are on our website. You know, let it boil for a half an hour, pour it out, rinse it out, and then you have a clean pan to start. And then you also saw that we were sort of, you know, outfitting our, you know, homemade firebox with some grates to let the fire under, you know, to let the air under the fire, some fire bricks to hold in that heat and push it up through the pan and through the sap before reaching the outside. And those are principles that you can use no matter what your fuel source is and no matter what your firebox structure is like. If you're using brick, great. You're probably going to also want to use, you know, a fire grate underneath. And if you're using some other kind of metal contraption, great. You know, sort of keep those things in mind if you're putting your own rig together. Something to think about if you are going to be putting your own rig together is maybe you'll want a real pan. And by what I mean by a real pan, this picture is there to demonstrate. So one of the things that sets our product as we make it now, aside from sort of what you can throw together on your own, is really the pan. And the pan does the lion's share of the work in terms of the engineering of your rig. And this is a divided pan or a baffled pan. And the reason it's divided or baffled is because it allows you to do something called continuous boil. So most people, when they start, you do a batch method. You know, they'll get a big pot, they'll fill it with sap, they'll boil it down, they'll either pour it off to something else and start over and keep boiling that something else, right? And sort of have like the 3-pot method. Or they'll boil down that, so they'll have one big pot, boil it down, add more sap, boil it down, add more sap, boil it down, right? Then they run out of sap and then boil it down. It'll all work, and certainly at the advent of maple syrup or maple sugar as it was then, that's what people had to work with, if that, right? So it'll work, it just won't be as fast and efficient with the wood or the propane that you're using than if you were to have a baffled pan. These chambers you can't see in the picture, but there's a cutout that really makes this an S curve. So if you start from the pour off in the bottom right and draw an S through the pan with your finger, where that S ends up is where you pour in the sap, okay? And you can see in this picture that the sections of the pan have different colors. The section in the back is lighter, the section in the middle is medium, and the section near the pour off is darker. And that's because we've been continuously pouring sap into the back left of this pan. And instead of mixing with the more concentrated sap that's that's sort of already along the root turning into syrup, it actually pushes as the solution that's in the pan pulls, so that what you end up having is a pan that has 3 different gradients, 3 different sugar gradients in it. The stuff near the pour off is closest to syrup. The stuff near the put in is closest to sap. This allows you to add sap continuously without killing the boil. If you've ever noticed, it takes a lot less energy to keep something boiling than it does to get something to boil in the first instance, right? So the batch method that I was talking about, you know, putting sap, boil it down, add more, you've killed the boil. Or sap, boil it down, pour it off, start again, you have to start another boil, right? So you didn't kill the boil, but you have to start it all over again. This baffled pan allows you to add sap all the time. And in fact, I've got customers that will add sap and take off syrup at the same time. I've never done that myself, but it does happen. Most of us pour off when we're awful darn close to syrup. And we know that either because we've done it enough to know what the solution will act like when it's very close to syrup. It gets ahead like a Guinness. It gets angry. Or because we're taking a temperature reading. You'll notice our pans don't have a built-in thermometer, but you can use a candy thermometer. And then for finishing, we just started using this year a maple syrup thermometer, which will show you, it's very handy to have. We normally finish inside on our kitchen stove